One of the most influential plot points of the last 15 years in One Piece was the alliance that had formed between the Straw Hat Pirate crew and the Heart Pirate crew. This had occurred on Punk Hazard. The repercussions of this event would be far-reaching, either directly or indirectly resulting in the downfall of one of the 7 warlords, the liberation of an entire country, an assault on and subsequent relocation of the Revolutionary Army's headquarters, and the downfall and subsequent replacement of 2 of the Yonko. All of this had begun with a single conversation between the Straw Hat Pirates captain Monkey D. Luffy and the captain of the Heart Pirates Trafalgar D. Water Law. Nowadays, Law is seen as a serious contender for the pirate throne and one of the very few people who is truly capable of fighting on even footing with the likes of Yonko and Admirals. In fact, as of making this video, the last that we saw of Law was him holding his own and arguably even winning a confrontation against one of the most feared pirates in the entire One Piece world, Blackbeard. But before Law had reached his current position, his life was quite different. How did a child aspiring to be a great doctor like his parents become the feared surgeon of death? In order to find out, we need to explore Law's past, from his birth all the way up until his introduction at a slave auction within Shabundi Archipelago. This video continues my series on the backstories of One Piece characters, including the likes of the Straw Hats, Supernovas, Warlords, Yonkos, and anyone else that you recommend for me to cover in the comments. So starting off, Law was born 24 years before the start of the series, in the country of Flevance within the North Blue. The country was famous for its vast deposits of amber lead, an ore unique to the island. It was in high demand throughout the world, and it had made up a major part of Flevance's economy. As the ore had caused the surrounding environment to take on a beautiful white shade, the country had come to be known as the White City. Law lived in Flevance with his parents, who were the best doctors in the country, as well as his younger sister Trafalgar Lamy. Law's early life was defined by the climax of the symptoms of amber lead poisoning appearing within the country, with most patients diagnosed as terminally ill and given only a few months to live with this form of poisoning. The effects of amber lead poisoning were cumulative, and they were able to be passed on genetically. The majority of the population of Flevance was diagnosed at a similar time. The world government and the nobles of Flevance were aware of the growing danger of the disease years in advance, but they had suppressed the information as the economy surrounding amber lead was deemed to be too lucrative. They had maintained a monopoly on information relating to the disease, and they had refused even to disclose that it was not contagious, and therefore no risk to anyone outside of the patients themselves. Because this information was not released, the neighbouring countries surrounding Flevance had declared war in the fear that their own citizens would contract the disease. Both Law and Lamy were diagnosed with the disease, with Law's sister suffering from an advanced stage of it. While Law's parents and the doctors of the island had attempted to help the people suffering and had tried their best to find a cure, their efforts were hindered by a lack of supplies due to the ongoing war. The war had quickly turned to a genocide, with Flevance soon becoming overwhelmed. A local nun had approached Law explaining that she was collecting children in order to flee the island and had offered him to come with her. Law had declined as he was unwilling to leave his sister behind, who by this point was so sick that she had to remain within a hospital. The nun had promised to return for Law at a later time. However, before any escape could be made, Law had witnessed his parents shot dead by an extermination crew who were massacring Flevance's citizens. Everyone, including the nun and the children that she had intended to protect, as well as all of Law's friends, were killed in the raid, and the hospital that his sister was inside was also burnt down. Law had only managed to survive the destruction of his country by hiding under the dead bodies being shipped out of the city. He was able to successfully escape the quarantine zone that had been set in place, but because of the trauma of witnessing the genocide of his people, as well as the knowledge of his impending death from amber lead poisoning, Law had started to become nihilistic and cynical. Having lost everything dear to him at the hands of the cruelties of the world, Law had started to dream of destroying as much of the world as possible before he himself would die. This was revenge against the very world that had taken everything away from him. Eventually, Law had made his way over to a port town called Spider Miles, which was the home base of the Donkyo pirates. Understanding that joining a pirate crew would help him in achieving his dreams, Law had approached the crew intending to join them. As both an attempt to show his resolve and to threaten the crew, Law had strapped grenades onto his body before approaching them. He was quite open with his goals and had happily stated that his goal was to destroy as much of the world as possible. This had included towns, houses, even people, and that nothing else mattered because at this point he only had a few years left to live. Law was only 10 years old at this time. Now, while he was accepted into the crew, Diamante, one of the crew's executives, executives had pointed out that over 100 children had joined the crew previously, only for them to drop out crying after 2 days once realizing what life as a member of a pirate crew had entailed. The only children who had remained persistent and had remained with the crew were Baby Five and Buffalo. It was at this point that Law had met Doflamingo's younger brother, Donkyo Roshinante. The others had referred to him as Corazon. Despite his clumsiness, Corazon had special abilities, but was mute due to a childhood trauma. Corazon, however, hated children, and upon meeting Law for the first time, he had thrown him out of the base window, landing Law into a mountain of trash and metal below. Law, having survived the fall, was enraged at this treatment. He had sworn to himself that one day he would kill Corazon. A week after he had joined the crew, it was discovered that Law had Amber Lead syndrome, causing panic amongst the members. Doflamingo had clarified the truth about the disease and that it was not contagious. Intrigued, Doflamingo had questioned Law if there were any other survivors from Flevans, to which Law had replied that he did not know as he was too busy running away. When questioned on how he had managed to survive and escape his country's extermination, Law explains that he had done so by hiding in a pile of corpses, causing one of the crew's executives, Gladius, to gag on his food, stating that he no longer believed in anything and he has no reason to fear death. Law declared that he would have his revenge on Corazon for attacking him, despite Doflamingo earlier saying that anyone who wounds his brother would be killed. Baby Five slaps Law on the back of his head after he says this and warns him that the consequences of doing such a thing would include torture and that he shouldn't underestimate pirates. Law simply glared at her in response, causing her to start crying from fear. Afterwards, while most of the crew were out raiding in the city, Gladius and Senor Pink would explain to the others the history behind Flevans, and therefore give context to Law's past and the reason why he acts the way that he does. At this time, Law would find Corazon alone, reading a newspaper while sitting in a junkyard. Feeling disgusted that a fool like Corazon was alive while all of his family and friends were dead, Law ends up stabbing him in the back. Buffalo sees this, but Law had bribed him with ice cream in order to keep quiet. Believing that once Corazon's death was discovered, he would be the obvious and rightful suspect, Law attempts to flee from the island only to be caught by Giola and Mac Vice, who end up bringing him back to Doflamingo. Corazon was also present at the base, having survived from Law's attack, which had led Law to believe that he had informed his brother about what had happened, and that Law would soon be killed in response. Instead, Doflamingo announced Law's official induction into the Donkyo Pirates. It was a shock to Law that Corazon hadn't said anything. He had reminded Doflamingo of his limited time, but Doflamingo mentioned the possibility of a devil fruit power to heal him. If Law survived, Doflamingo would train him as his own right-hand man. When Doflamingo noticed Corazon's wound, Corazon had lied about the cause of it. Over the next 2 years, Law had fought alongside the crew and had learned from them, with Doflamingo teaching him academics, Lao Ji teaching him martial arts, Gladius teaching him marksmanship, and Diamante teaching him swordsmanship. As Law's amber lead poisoning had worsened, Baby Five noticed more white spots on his body, and Law had thought that he had about a year left to live. During a conversation with Buffalo and Baby Five, the topic of real names had come up, with Buffalo and Baby Five both revealing their real names to Law. They had demanded to know Law's in return, with Buffalo threatening to reveal what Law had done to Corazon 2 years ago if he didn't tell them. Law then reveals that Trafalgar D. Water Law is his full name, and he explains that he wasn't supposed to tell anyone, as Water was his mother's family name, and he was told to keep his D initial as a secret. Baby Five quickly lost interest, though Law was immediately dragged away by Corazon, who had overheard the group talking. When the two of them had reached a safe enough distance that they could not be overheard, Corazon demanded to know if that truly was Law's full name, showing that he was not in fact mute and was capable of speech the entire time. Corazon explained that if Law really was a D, then he should leave the crew immediately, and he should stay as far away from Doflamingo as possible. Law was understandably shocked that Corazon was able to talk, and he had tried to yell at him for lying to the crew. However, Corazon then uses his devil fruit power, which he had also kept a secret, in order to create a soundproof barrier around them, thus preventing any noise from leaving or entering the barrier. He then explains to Law that his goal all along was to stop Doflamingo's madness, claiming that he had always been evil and that his true nature was only known to the top executives. Corazon had feared that Law would grow up to become like Doflamingo if he had remained with the crew. But when Corazon sees that Law has no problem with this and that he wants to become a man just like Doflamingo, Corazon then explains to him the meaning behind those with the initial D. Those with that middle initial were all part of the D clan, people who were referred to as God's natural enemy. To people like Corazon and Doflamingo, who had initially grown up as celestial dragons who were considered as gods, the D-Clan was their greatest fear. Even with the revelation of his heritage though, Law was unfazed over remaining with the crew, exclaiming that he was Doflamingo's subordinate, not Corazon's, and that since he would die in a year anyway, everything else is worthless. Although Corazon has suggested finding a cure for Law's illness, Law insisted that there wasn't one, and he had threatened to reveal Corazon's secrets. While Corazon tried to stop him, Law's improved fighting skills allowed him to overpower Corazon. Later, Law had decided not to tell Doflamingo, repaying Corazon's silence about their previous incident. Shortly after this, Corazon would kidnap Law and leave the crew, leaving behind a note saying that they were going to find a cure for Law's illness. Law was annoyed by Corazon's determination, telling him that nowhere would be capable of healing him. He also grew suspicious of Corazon when he had contacted Sengoku through their Dendenmushi, informing him that he was temporarily leaving his post for personal reasons and that he would keep him updated. While Law couldn't hear who he was talking to, he immediately suspected that it was the Marines, and he had angrily confronted Corazon, asking if he was working for them. Corazon, however, hides his affiliation with the Marines from Law. He had then taken Law to several hospitals located across different islands, all of which reacted fearfully upon learning of Law's Amber Lead syndrome. The rejection and flashbacks of his homeland's destruction began to overwhelm Law. Angry at Law's mistreatment, Corazon assaulted hospital staff and he had burnt down the hospitals. After 6 months, even Corazon had begun to lose hope, and he was saddened by the combination of Law's worsening condition and their fruitless search. One night, thinking that Law was asleep, Corazon expressed sympathy for Law's suffering and he had broken down in tears. Law, having been awake to hear Corazon the entire time, had developed a greater amount of respect for the older pirate. This had caused their relationship to become more friendly, with Law now referring to him as Corazon, much to Corazon's shock. It was then that Doflamingo had contacted Corazon and Law through their Dendenmushi, sharing his plan to steal the Opi Opi no Mi, a devil fruit with the potential to cure Law. However, he had intended for Corazon to eat the fruit, unaware that Corazon had already consumed a devil fruit. After hanging up, Doflamingo and the rest of the executives discussed the uncanny abilities the Marines seemed to have to track their movements recently, and how this had only really started after Corazon had departed from the crew. While Diamante proposed that it could be a coincidence, the crew was clearly growing suspicious. Corazon revealed to Law his plan to steal the fruit before Doflamingo, understanding that his brother must have been suspicious and was willing to kill him if he wanted him to eat the Opi Opi no Mi. This was due to one of the strongest powers available to the Opi Opi no Mi wielder, the ability to grant eternal youth to a person at the cost of their wielder's life. By telling Corazon to eat the fruit, Doflamingo was as good as telling him that he was going to have to sacrifice his life at some point in the near future. However, Corazon's plan was to have Law eat the fruit once they had stolen it, as Law already had the introductory knowledge of the human body from his studying to be a doctor, so he would be able to use the devil fruit to great effect. Corazon immediately contacted Sengoku, demanding to know where the Opi Opi no Mi was located, as the Marines intended to purchase the devil fruit from its owner. Sengoku was shocked to hear that Corazon had known about this detail, as it was top secret, but eventually revealed that the trade would be taking place on Rubeck Island 3 weeks from now. Meanwhile, as Corazon was helping to organize the plan to ambush the Donkyo pirates during their attempt to steal the Opi Opi no Mi, Law's condition had started to rapidly deteriorate at this time. Corazon had urged Law to stay alive for just 3 more weeks. He had started to become frantic because success was so close at hand. While sailing towards their goal, the pair were caught up in a typhoon, where a delirious Law had once more confronted Corazon, reminding him that the world government knew of the dangers of Amber Lead. They had known about the truth of the illness, yet they had allowed Law's family and the country of Flevance to be killed. He asked Corazon again if he was part of the Marines, but he lies to him again by denying the allegation. Corazon then reminded Law that once they had stolen the devil fruit, they would immediately become enemies of both Doflamingo and the world government. The pair soon arrived at Minion Island, a neighboring island to Rubeck, where the pirate crew in possession of the Opi Opi no Mi were stationed. The Donkyo pirates were likewise stationed on the neighboring Swallow Island, where Corazon and Law were supposed to be meeting with the crew. Corazon left Law hidden in the corner of an abandoned village as he departed to steal the devil fruit. He would then use his own devil fruit to assault the mansion in which the pirate crew was hiding, while Law had previously ridiculed Corazon for how useless his devil fruit power was, but he used it to great effect in his attack. He had silenced an explosion to cause confusion before knocking out the lights in their their base and silently sneaking up on the crew, shooting and attacking the pirates, slowly lowering their numbers. Corazon was able to successfully steal the Opi Opi no Mi and had returned to Law. Despite Law's skepticism, Corazon force-fed him the fruit. After celebrating their victory, Corazon had collapsed, revealing bullet wounds from his mission. Law had attempted to heal him with his newfound power, but had failed, because he had yet to learn how to use his powers. Corazon laughs at Law's attempts, explaining that devil fruits don't just work like magic, before requesting a favor from Law. He asks that Law take a secret letter to a marine stationed on the western side of the island, telling him that the information within could save a faraway kingdom called Dressrosa. Law had taken the letter and delivered it to a marine that he had found by himself, before begging the man to come and save Corazon, telling him that he had been shot. He and the other officer returned, only for Law to be shocked when both the marine and Corazon recognized each other. Unfortunately for Law, the marine he had chosen to deliver the letter to was Virgo, the previous Corazon within the Doflamingo pirates and Doflamingo spy within the Marines. Upon reading the letter containing all of Corazon's information to the Marines, Virgo realized that the pair had betrayed the family and had then brutally attacked them. He easily defeated both of them and immediately contacted Doflamingo to explain the situation to him. Doflamingo reveals that they had just arrived onto the island, having spotted the Marine ambush that was awaiting them at their original meetup spot on Swallow Island. He had told Virgo that Corazon had likely stolen the Opi Opi no Mi, as the pirates they had encountered so far had been complaining about it being taken away from them. However, when Virgo turned back to Corazon and Law, the pair were missing, having made their escape while he was distracted. Doflamingo immediately uses his birdcage technique to encase the island in an inescapable net, preventing anyone from escaping with the Opi Opi no Mi. He was in fact unaware that it had already been eaten by Law. Realizing that his death was inevitable, Corazon became determined to ensure that Law would survive. He smiled down at Law, intending to die with a smile, in the hopes that whenever Law thought of him in the future after his death, he would always remember him smiling. Corazon carried Law near to the coast, where he had placed him inside a treasure chest and told him to remain hidden. He had used his devil fruit power to place a calm field around Law, ensuring that any noise that the boy would make wouldn't be heard. He does this before telling Law that he would survive and that he loves him. Corazon served as a distraction to protect Law after he was violently attacked by members of Doflamingo's crew once they had found him, while Law could only sit helplessly within the chest. Doflamingo eventually arrived, confronting his brother over his betrayal and demanded to know where both the Opi Opi no Mi and Law were. Corazon told Doflamingo that Law had already eaten the devil fruit and was outside of the birdcage when it was set up, so he had likely been rescued by the Marines already. Baby 5 and Buffalo confirmed this as likely to be true, as they had earlier intercepted a Marine transmission about an unrelated child being taken into the custody of the Marines, which they had assumed to have been Law. Despite Corazon's demands for Doflamingo to leave Law alone and to let him live his life now that he was free from his illness, Doflamingo had ended up shooting Corazon multiple times before releasing the birdcage and demanding his crew set off to attempt to retrieve Law. The Donkyo pirates left for their ship, taking the treasure that they had looted from the island, including the chest containing Law with them. While they were attempting to leave the island, they came under fire from Marines that were led by Vice Admiral Suru. This had allowed Law the opportunity to escape from the chest without their notice. Corazon, who was fatally wounded here, had forced himself to stay alive long enough for Law to make it as far away as he could, knowing that upon his death his ability would be released and Law's cries would be able to be heard. He ended up dying shortly after Law had successfully escaped. Law had managed to make it to the neighboring Swallow Island, where he had encountered two boys bullying a young panda mink called Beppo. The two boys, Shachi and Penguin, attempted to pick a fight against Law, but they were swiftly beaten. This had caused the three boys to become interested in Law, resulting in them joining him and becoming the first members of his newly formed Heart Pirates. Law would soon master his devil fruit and cure himself of his sickness. Over the next 12 years, the Heart Pirates would grow in strength, with Law eventually becoming known as a super rookie and among one of the pirates referred to as the worst generation, who had descended upon Shabondi Archipelago at the time. While he was there, Law would meet another super rookie called Straw Hat Luffy, who he would eventually grow close enough to in order to form an alliance with, a partnership that he would use to take down Doflamingo and the Donkyo pirates once and for all, as well as avenging the death of his mentor and friend. This was quite the lengthy backstory to dive into, and I hope that you've enjoyed my coverage of Law's past. Let me know in your comments where you think Law's backstory ranks for you among all of the other backstories in One Piece. Personally, it's definitely one of my top 5 backstories, and it has cemented the character of Corazon as a legend in my eyes. If you enjoyed this video, then definitely consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel so that you can remain up to date with all of my latest One Piece videos. Also, let me know if there are any other character backstories you want me to cover in the comments, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next One Piece video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.